Everyone, Mike here. How are you feeling about Christmas? Feeling excited, feeling anxious, feeling overwhelmed, feeling maybe not feeling anything? Like, why are you even talking about Christmas? We've still got other things to worry about in our world. And that's true, isn't it? Well, Christmas holds the hope, doesn't it? The hope of promise, the hope that reminds us of God's promises to us and how He's fulfilled them in Jesus. As Christians, the weeks leading up to Christmas are known as Advent. Advent means coming or arrival. And so we remember at Advent Jesus' first coming and also His second coming. But to understand Christmas, you really have to consider the whole of Scripture, the Bible, and how God has prepared given His promises to His people and how He's fulfilled them. And His promises really go way back in Scripture, thousands of years ago. This is from Genesis chapter 18. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground, and he said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so that you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." And then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife, Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." And Sarah was afraid. So she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did laugh." It's a wonderful story, isn't it? This story, a very mysterious story. You see these mysterious strangers turn up while Abraham and the others are resting, and see how he greets them and how he treats them. They're obviously really important people, but that just really sets the scene for what they have to say. See what they say to them. What they say in verse 10. One of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." This is a reminder to Abraham and Sarah of the promise that God had made. God made that promise in Genesis 12, and He called Abraham and Sarah. Now, they were known as Abraham and Sarai. They were living in Haran with Abraham's family, and we know that they couldn't conceive. And God calls them in Genesis 12 and makes this promise to them that they will be the parents of a great nation. And so the problem is that Sarah and Abraham can't have children. And as the story goes along, we see that they try and make this happen. And Sarah gives his slave to Abraham, and she has a son. That's Ishmael. But that wasn't God's plan. And so God comes in chapter 17 and again says that promise. And at that time, Abraham laughs and says, "How can this be possible? And, have the son Ishmael. Why don't you make him the one to receive that promise?" But no, it's for Abraham and Sarah. And so in chapter 18, they come again, or God comes again. We can see that it's really God that's speaking here and makes the promise once more. And so the Bible is about these promises. And these promises go all the way back to the very beginning, when God promises that through the offspring of Adam and Eve, there will be one who will bring victory over evil. And so we see this promise This is part of the story of the Bible, the way God brings about his promises. So a promise is it's a declaration that you will do something or you will not do something. You think about a wedding service, it's where you make promises there. So we make promises all the time and we don't always fulfill them. And we see here Sarah's reaction. She's quite skeptical. Notice verse 11 and verse 12, where she hears this and she laughs to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? So Sarah is quite skeptical that this can even be a possibility. And then the Lord catches her out on that and reminds her that with this statement in verse 14, is anything too hard for the Lord? And this is because the promise is based on God's character and God's nature. Sometimes when we make promises, we don't always carry them through, but God's nature is faithful and he always carries through what he promises, and this is his promise to them. And so we can rely in terms of our salvation and our faith. It needs to rely on God's promises. This is something that God promises, that he will rescue us and rescue us ultimately from sin and death. That was a promise in Genesis 3:15 through an offspring, and that's fulfilled through Jesus. Romans chapter 4, Paul really covers this off, the faith of Abraham and Sarah. Even though it was physically impossible, they trusted in God. They put their trust in God, and God was faithful to his promise. Remember verse 14 from Genesis 18. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And we say no, nothing's too hard for the Lord. So let that be an encouragement to you to remember the promises that God makes and the ways in which he fulfills them. And that's really the storyline of Scripture. And he makes promises to us, promise that he will be with us, whatever we're going through in life. So I pray that you can consider God's promise in Scripture, how he's fulfilled them, how he fulfilled his promise for Abraham and Sarah. And it doesn't happen in chapter 18, but a few chapters later, Sarah and Abraham do conceive and they have a son, and his name is Isaac. And Isaac means he laughs. And we remember how that's a different kind of laugh. It's not a cynical laugh, it's a joyful laugh. And now that God's promises come true. Hey, bless you guys. Hope that's encouraging to you. And hey, happy Advent. Thanks.